That's lovely. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about how I develop my practice in teaching and modelling social communication. I'm going to look at why I do this, and I'll be linking my practice to the approaches in the Education Endowment Foundation's evidence store to support personal, social and emotional development. My name's Sarah Smith, and I have been an Ofsted registered childminder for over 20 years. Prior to this, I was a class teacher in a nursery and infant school. I studied for a master's degree in early years professional practice in 2012, and this has led to a passion for raising the standards in early years. I've worked as an assessor and a mentor on the early years professional and teacher status programmes, and I'm currently an area lead on the DfE's COVID recovery programme. I spent most of my working life in Thurrock, down in Essex. You can probably tell that from my accent. We've moved on a slide too many. And down in Essex, I ran a busy childminding setting. But I now live and I work in Buxton in Derbyshire, and I've got a much smaller setting with just early years children. So now we have the next slide, please. Thank you. Don't worry if you're thinking that social communication isn't something you do. Initially, when I was asked about social communication and my approach to it, to be honest, I went into panic mode and I thought, I don't do this and I don't know anything about it. But actually, when I researched it and looked it up, I discovered it's something that is embedded in my practice. The Education Endowment Foundation defines social communication as where the child is taught to notice body language, spoken words, and how to listen and respond in appropriate ways. By doing this, they learn how to help others and to seek help within a relationship. For me, social communication includes taking turns, understanding rules such as when to listen and when to speak, using manners, body language, and facial expression. So we've got the next slide. So why teach social communication? Showing children examples of positive social communication and talking to them about these examples can improve children's own social communication. Providing children with the language for positive social communication can improve their PSED, and for example, their cooperation and their assertiveness. So showing children good examples of social communication, for example, by using stories and puppets, can help them to understand and follow the rules of social communication. Following this with conversations about the examples of pro-social behaviour, that's behaviour that benefits others, I believe helps children to adopt similar behaviours themselves. Some interventions provide children with the language they need for positive social communication, and this can help them to cooperate better, express their emotions better, and pay attention to other people's emotions. Next slide, please. The Education Endowment Foundation talks about 7 approaches to teaching and modelling social communication, and these are listed on the slide. So we have waiting, body positioning, mirroring, gesturing, non-verbal communication, demonstrating rules, and then also reminders of rules. And I think that many of those approaches actually overlap each other. I'm going to explore how I model these with the children that I mind. When I was reflecting on social communication, and after I realised that I did know something about it, I concluded that modelling this to young children must be something that everybody does to a certain extent naturally. But recently, I had lunch with a young couple that I consider to be good parents, and I couldn't help have my childmindery hat on and observe their behaviour with their little one. And most of the approaches didn't happen at all. So maybe this is something that I have developed over the years of my practice. I do think it's something that's really easy to do with the children with very quick results, and it just needs to become a positive habit within your practice. So I'll go through the 7 approaches and I'll talk about some of the ways that I model, teach these in my setting. But it would be lovely to hear some of the ways that you encourage the children too. So for each approach, there'll be an opportunity for your input as we go through. So after each one, I'll ask you about your experience, and then if you'd like to put your mic on or your hand up, that sort of thing, then we can have your input as well. So the next slide, please. The first approach is waiting. Waiting can include modelling how to take turns with a toy or in a game. It can also be encouraging the children to wait for something like another child at the dinner table. When a child wants a toy that someone else has got, I usually suggest that they wait until that child is finished with it, and then that child will probably give it to them. Waiting at the dinner table, I know, isn't always possible, but it is dependent on the children that we have. But again, I do like them to learn to wait at the table until the others are finished, and I think this is nice manners. Waiting does help children learn self-control and how to get along with each other. So, has anyone got examples of times that they model waiting or ways that they teach the children to wait? I can't see anybody else's screens, so I don't know if anyone else has put their hands up or trying to unmute themselves.
I'll have a go, Sarah.
Thank you, Julie.
I think even simple things like waiting to get coats on, waiting to get shoes on, because my younger children all need help.
Yeah.
So they're all having a go while I'm seeing to one of them, and then it'll be the next one's turn.
Yeah.
So yes, we're all waiting.
Yeah, so they're waiting, but they're actually actively waiting in a sense, aren't they? Because they're not just standing doing nothing. They're, like I say, they're having a go at the same time. Yeah, excellent, yeah. Thank you. And I saw somebody put something in the chat, which Sarah or Emma, are you able to read that out?
Hi, it's from Louisa. She says, we do it when we talk about our day and wait until someone has finished before we share our news. Yeah, lovely. So waiting turns when each other's talking, it's really good practice, isn't it? No? Anybody else? Okay. I have got a few more examples. So when you ask the children to wait for a turn on a specific piece of equipment, like the slide, oh look, somebody else has put waiting in the dinner line in the dinner hall, or waiting for their turn to have snack. Lovely, thank you. There's also, I put down, very similar to waiting in turn at the dinner hall, is waiting to do something like wash their hands, where there is only one sink, or so one person can go at a time. And then also you waiting, you modelling waiting when you're wanting to have an answer from them. So using the 5-second rule is quite a good example of teaching the children to wait. Okay, so next slide, please. So the second approach is body positioning. It's important when talking to the children that you position yourself so that they can see you, and in particular, they can have a clear view of your face. This could often mean getting down to their level. In a group, all the children need to be able to see you. Body positioning also includes modelling the gestures, the postures, and the signs to promote to the children doing good looking, good listening, and good sitting. And this could be in a group time or in adult-led situation. And this gives the children a model of appropriate body language for interacting with others, and it will support them to develop relationships. I don't know whether you've had a chance to read the case study that I wrote, but in that I spoke about meal times at my setting and about sitting at the table with the children during those meal times, and that I position myself so that I can easily see all the children and be seen by them as I model social interaction and also model other things like eating with a knife and fork. So it's also an opportunity to offer the children help and encourage their independence. So how do you position yourself to aid the development of the children's social communication? So again, if you'd like to chip in with ways in which you help.
Well, I do try, when we're reading a story, I do try to sit opposite the children, but very often you find they all want to move around and sit next to me. And I'm never sure, do I say, no, go back and sit opposite again? Or do I let them come and sit with me? Because they like to see the book. So it's a bit of an awkward one. I'm never sure which way I should do it.
I mean, personally, I think both really are fine, aren't they? Sometimes it's right to snuggle in with the children and build the relationship in that way. Other times it might be more appropriate for the children to sit in front of you so that they can see your facial expressions, etc. And I think you know that at the time, don't you? So I think
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Louisa added to the chat, she put about sitting on the floor at the children's level, and that was something else I mentioned, sitting on the floor with them so that you can get involved in their play, but also being sure that your body position doesn't get in their way, because you could easily do that, couldn't you? Any other ideas? So it could also mean positioning yourself at the children's height, but kneeling beside them rather than in front of them. And it could be offering an open hand to them so that they can decide whether they want physical contact from you or not. Thank you. So next slide, please. So the third approach is mirroring. When you mirror a child's facial expression or gestures, then neurons in their brain will be activated to promote joint attention and engagement. For example, if a child is looking sad and you go over to talk to them about it, by mirroring their sad facial expression, they will feel that you understand their feelings and they may feel more heard. They may also be more willing to open up to you in this case. By using actual mirrors with the children, you can encourage them to understand their facial expressions more and be able to mirror those that they see in other children, thus showing empathy. Mirroring a child's actions in play. So, for example, if they were playing with the sand and pouring the sand through their fingers, if you then poured the sand through your fingers, then you could help to connect with them and engage in parallel play with them. So can you think of any ways in which you use mirroring with the children, and what are the outcomes? So perhaps this is a harder one that maybe we need to reflect on a bit more and do a bit more in our practice. Another example that I thought of was when dancing to the music with the children. Sometimes it's nice and they find it really quite amusing if you copy their actions and dance in the same way that they dance. And then that gives value to what they're doing, doesn't it? So next slide, please.
I was just going to.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I was about to share. We've got a little boy who's pre-verbal in nursery at the moment, and he, when you're mirroring the sounds that he's making, he's then starting to mirror that back, which is that interaction and that two-way conversation is of a very low level, but he's really starting to understand that element of communication and language. And we found through lots of songs and him starting to use that different range and was copying that has been leading to lots of lovely engagements.
So it does show, doesn't it, that it works, and it's giving worth to what he's doing. He's showing that when he does that, you value it, and so he does it again. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. And then Louisa also said about mirroring when they're playing with babies, doing the same sort of thing, mirroring their play again. Okay, so we will move on to the next slide, which is gesturing. Thank you. Gestures can include body language, signs such as BSL or Makaton, and indicators that can be used alongside spoken language. The children need to have a shared understanding of what signs and gestures mean for them to be effective. They can enable the child to have a greater understanding when you use them, and they can help a non-verbal child to communicate more effectively. Again, in my case study, I mentioned how I gesture alongside instructions for questions to help the children understand what I'm asking. So, for example, if I'm asking if they want me to scrape the last mouthful of their plate, then I will gesture that scraping of a plate. Or if I am asking them to maybe use their fork, if they're not doing it, then I will gesture using their fork. And even as I say it now, I'm finding myself doing those gestures. And then another example is where a little one of mine, at the end of a meal, she will gesture to me that she wants to wipe her hands. And I know that that is her signing to me that she's finished her meal, and so therefore she wants to wash her hands. Using action rhymes with the children is another way that you can support this aspect of social communication. So, for example, teaching the children the actions to well-known songs like Wind the Bobbin Up, Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes, or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and then using these actions consistently at future singing times will really support the children to understand and give value to gestures. And I'm sure you will find that children can take part by joining in the actions much before they're able to join in with singing the words. So how do you support children to use signs or gestures in your practice? Yep, thank you, EYFS team. So gestures alongside good sitting and that, yes, we've already mentioned that. And it reinforces, doesn't it, when you say good sitting, if you're doing an action, then it's two ways of communicating that request to the children. Any other ways that you use gestures? Louise?
I think I just tend to do it all the time. I'm very expressive. I think I'm very expressive with my hands, so I think I tend to just do it all the time.
Yeah.
For everything, and not just to the children, to the parents and everybody. I tend to say just very, very much use my hands.
Yeah.
Sometimes so much I think I've got to stop. I think this is too much. But for the children, it's just for everything, like say, sit down, coat on, hat on. Everything is just a gesture that goes with the word.
Yeah, I agree. And it just reinforces what we're saying to them and gives them two ways to help them to understand that communication, doesn't it? Yeah. And Louise said about gesturing, coughing into your elbow. And yeah, that's another thing. I think that definitely if I ask the children to cough into their elbows, then I would mime that action too. Thank you. And then you mentioned about putting on coats, and I know that I always gesture and mime putting on their coats and doing up the zip when I ask them to do that. Next slide, please. So non-verbal communication, and that includes many of the approaches that we've already covered. So the signs, the gesturing, but it also includes body language. And we also have facial expression and the use of pictures such as PECs or a visual timetable. The Ofsted research review, The Best Start in Life, which they have just published part 2 of, found that some babies born in the COVID pandemic have struggled to respond to basic facial expression. This could be due to them meeting with a smaller variety of people, and many of those people that they would have met with would have been wearing masks. So they may not have seen the facial expressions of many people around that time. Similarly, in Edward Tronick's still face expression in 1975, which is a long time ago, but I think it's still very valid, mothers had normal interactions with their children, and then after a little while, the mother will become unresponsive and expressionless for a couple of minutes. And this causes the infant to withdraw and in many cases become distressed. And then that in turn releases harmful stress hormones into the brain, so harms development. So I think it really does show how important our facial expression is for the development of the children. The Centre on the Developing Child at Harvard University have also done some research into responding to children's non-verbal communication, and they refer to it as serve and return, like a game of tennis. A child will serve by showing an interest in something through their gestures or their facial expression, and the adult will respond in an interesting way. And then this is repeated, like the forwards and backwards in a game of tennis. The key for this is noticing what the child is interested in. When this is done, Harvard say that the neural pathways in the brain that support the development of communication and social skills will be developed, and you will strengthen relationships. When you give the child the opportunity to take the lead in this way, you support them to explore their world. And by modelling the use of non-verbal communication, you're enabling children to learn and understand that this is an important part of social communication. So like Emma said about repeating the sounds back to the child, and then the child will repeat the sounds, it becomes that serve and return. So the initial conversation that a child is learning to do. It is important, however, to not only use verbal communication, but provide opportunities with the child to discuss how they help with social communication. And I think it was maybe Louise who mentioned about playing with dolls, but that's a really good one. And you could use that to discuss with the child and model how to soothe the doll in the role play area, and explain how rocking the baby or stroking their cheek would make them feel. And you could also include praising a child for using a sign or a gesture. So for example,
when the little girl uses a sign for wanting to wash her hands, then I might say to her, thank you for signing that you want to wipe your hands. I understand you finished your dinner now. And then that will reinforce to her that it is important to use these non-verbal communications. So what types of non-verbal communication do you use? Thinking of maybe some different types of non-verbal communication other than the ones we mentioned in the other aspects. Who would like to give some ideas?
Jump in again. I'm not sure if it would count under this, but like when we go to toddler groups, so the children are further away, so they can't speak to us particularly. We can speak to them, but perhaps look over just to see that they're okay doing what they're doing. You just smile, give them a nod, give them a wave.
Yeah.
Just so sort of checking in with them and letting them know that it's okay to do what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I can also think of times where you want them to come to you and maybe, I don't know, you want to do a nappy change or something like that. So you kind of do a gesture across the room and they understand that you want to check their nappy. Or you just do the come here.
Yeah.
Louisa, I can't read the whole of it. It says putting your hand out. Perhaps somebody could read Louisa's comment for me, please.
Putting your hand up to wait when you're out and about to keep them safe.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Thank you. Yeah, especially if they're crossing the road or something like that, then they understand that wait signal, don't they? I think also sometimes if you're talking to a child and another one comes in, rather than stopping what you're saying or letting that other child butt in, you might put your hand out in a gentle way to show them, just wait and then I'll talk to you in a moment, don't you? Other ideas? Okay, I've got a few more examples I thought of. So if you're looking at the pictures in a story, then you might discuss with the children how we know that the character feels happy or sad. A baby pointing to their cup when they want to drink, they're giving you a non-verbal communication before they're able to use verbal communication. And then another type of non-verbal communication, which is kind of on the edge of this, but I think it's worth mentioning, is in the past, I used a visual timetable with a child with English as an additional language while she was settling in to help her to understand what was going to come next and let her know when in the day it would be home time. Before I started using this, she was getting really anxious and she didn't understand what the routine of the day was or when she was going to see her mum next. So by using the visual timetable, she's then able to have some reassurance about what's coming next and when she's going to see mum again. Okay, next slide, please. So the next two work together, really. The sixth approach is demonstrating rules. In order to establish a code of conduct, the adult models and demonstrates how rules are used in a social context. This could be during conversations, so modelling how you wait for a turn in a conversation and you don't butt in when somebody else is talking, or in routines such as meal times or during a game. So in meal times we have lots of rules, don't we? Like sitting at the table, eating with your knife and fork, closing your mouth when you're eating, that sort of thing. And there's lots of rules that are needed to play a game fairly. During story times, we've already mentioned that the use of good sitting and listening reminders. So they're rules that we like to use for story time. And if we follow these up with specific praise and an explanation of how these enable everyone to listen and see the story, then the children can gain an understanding of why we need those rules. During a story time, a puppet could demonstrate good behaviour and unwanted behaviour, such as pushing as well. And also that gives the children the opportunity to discuss why we want certain behaviours. Going back to my blog about using the rainbow fish story, I've got a rainbow fish puppet and the children love to use it to retell the story. And they show him keeping his scales to himself or sharing with others. And at the same time, they show him being happy or sad, and they begin to start using that language within that as well, because it helps them to understand these feelings in a safe context. Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, back one, we've already gone too far, thank you. So the seventh final approach, according to the Education Endowment Trust, is reminders of rules. And reminders of rules may be very similar to demonstrating rules. The adult is acting as a mediator or a coach to enable the child to remember and follow the rules. As with demonstrating the rules, this can be done through specific praise. It could also be done by using a visual reminder of the rules. For example, using a talking object in a group situation so that the children know that they can say something when they're holding it. Again, we could come back to the good sitting, the good listening reminders that might be used at the beginning of a story time or group situation. So how do you demonstrate or give reminders of rules in your setting? Would anybody like to give an example? Okay, so thinking about another way that I have used rules is with older ones, sometimes you might get together and write the rules together and then display those rules as a reminder. With younger ones, you could still talk about the rules and decide the rules together, but maybe when you display them, use pictures or symbols as a memory prompt. So before we go on to any questions, let's look at what has been the outcomes of using social communication in my setting. So I've found that the children are more able to make their feelings and wishes understood. They feel more confident, which raises their self-esteem, and it puts them in a better place to learn. They understand what's expected of them, which raises behavioural levels. They build deeper relationships with their peers and with the adults in the setting, meaning that they actually want to be here, which is always a good thing. And parents have noticed their manners. For example, I had a parent comment the other day that their child now says, "You're welcome," if you say thank you to them. And I know that's something that I do. And then finally, a really important one, I think, happier children equals happier childminder or happier staff member. So, you know, that's imperative, isn't it? So now I'd like to open up the floor to you and see if there are any questions or if anyone would like to add anything. And if there are any questions that I can't answer, then I'll do my best to find out the answer, or Amanda might be able to help out. So shall we go back to the screen where we can see each other? Can we get rid of the slides? That's it, lovely. And feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question or add anything, because I'm sure that we've all got things that we can share that we can all learn from.
It was a little tricky when people are on these kinds of online, isn't it? It's not the same as when we're face to face.
Exactly.
If anybody's not sure about something they'd like to put, you feel free to use the chat. I know that some of you have done that through the session today.
So I just find that all really useful, Sarah. I thought it was really good. I've been making notes as I've gone through. And say some of the bits I do already, but some bits I've not thought of. Or perhaps I do, but I've not thought of it in the concept of social communication. But there are definitely bits that I've picked up as well that I'll start doing with the children.
I think that's what I found when I was doing the research for my blog and case study and everything, that it is something that we mainly do bits of, or we could improve on. And I found it absolutely fascinating to learn about it myself.
Yeah, and I don't think some of the things we do, that just the little things, and I don't think we always realise how crucial they are and how important they are, because you just do it anyway. Exactly. And I think this is sort of some of the things you've said, and I've thought, well, yeah, that is important. It does. It's not just something you do because you do it. You're doing it for a reason. Yeah. But I think I didn't realise the reason for a lot of the bits. So I found it really helpful.
I think it's also really nice to be able to give yourself a pat on the back as well and say, oh yes, I do this. And that's good because it's having this outcome and it's making it better for the children.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I think the bit that you were saying about when you were watching your friend with their toddler in the restaurant.
Yeah.
I think that bit made me realise that actually we're very natural at something because it's what we do for a living.
Yeah.
And actually you realise when you are observing other people that all of that gesturing and mimicking and mirroring is developing the communication of the children, and actually it doesn't come naturally to everybody, and it's just really interesting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And like I said at the beginning, we just need to make it a positive habit that we get into.
Thank you very much, Louisa. Thank you, Julie. That really good feedback. And like Sarah says, it's just giving yourself a pat on the back and that reflection of these are the things I am doing. And the Education Endowment Fund, where we're basing all of our case studies on, some of the approaches on there, you know, as Sarah said, first of all, and I was the same, you go in and you think, oh gosh, what is this? This is going to be something that's a bit scary. And actually, when you're looking through and you're unpicking it, you can actually pull out, well, we do that. But you know what? I think we could really look at this and move forward with a lot more of, for example, the mirroring, for example, or any element of that. So thank you very much, Sarah, for really showing how simple this is, but equally, as Julie stated there, how important these things are, that they're done all the time. And like Louisa said, a lot of it we kind of do naturally, don't we? But we can't take it for granted. So thank you very much, Sarah. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before you go?
No, not really on this subject, but I do think it's important that people feed back to the Stronger Practice Hub what it is that they want to hear about. So anyone on this, if you want to feedback in any way, then please do so.